light of your love is shining in the midst of the darkness shining. Jesus, light of the world, shine upon us. Set us free by the truth you now bring us. Shine on me. Shine.
Again, we want to take this opportunity to welcome you here with us. We are glad that you decided, if you're visiting with us, to take this time as an opportunity to serve God this morning, to worship Him, to praise Him for all the good that He's done for us, because all of us, no matter what the situation has been with you this week or whatever problem it may have been, you may have had, you were blessed in some capacity. You were blessed by being a child of God, just by being able to exist on this planet for some reason. So He has taken care of you this week, and we are here this morning to give Him praise back to what He's done for us. We've been looking at some things of what it means to have an abundant life. We looked last week at a couple of things here that I want to share with you. Jeremiah chapter 29 again, verses 11 through 13. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans of welfare, not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me, and I will come. You will come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. We looked at that first verse last week when we talked about this quest for abundant living. And I mentioned it's a quest because a journey indicates point A and point B, but a quest indicates something that's more lifelong, that it's something that we know we're never going to fully attain it until the end. And that's going to be when we pass from this life and we're able to attain that heavenly home if we've lived accordingly. So we're trying our best on this quest to search for this life, to find out what God's plan is, because He clearly says to us, I have plans to give you future and a hope. Plans not for evil, but plans for good. Then we looked at this passage here in John 10, that the thief comes in only to steal and to kill or to destroy. But Jesus says, I have come that you may have life and that you may have more abundantly. We looked at that word abundantly for just a second, and that word abundantly kind of indicates to us that a superabundance, one that's just over and above and just keeps on giving. That's the kind of life God wants us to have. But I want to be clear. God doesn't say you're going to be rich. God doesn't say you're going to have everything you want. Because your definition of abundant life living and God's definition of abundant life living are two different things. So we need to make sure we understand what God means when He says, you're going to have an abundant life. That's why I came to this earth. So that you can have a life that not only is a good one, it's better, because you know me, than any other life you could have ever had. And if you just start to think, if you're a Christian and you've been a Christian for some time, and you know all the good that you've had in your life, you just start for a moment to think about how different your life would be without God. How your life would be different if Christ had not come to this world. If there had been no death on the cross, no resurrection, no forgiveness of sins, no grace, no mercy, no love. It puts things in a little different perspective. So we looked at what we can do to have this life, and here's a few things that we looked at, this quest for abundant living. The first truth we looked at is we got to know who, what, where we are, and what we want. We got to discover that. You got to look at yourself. You got to take that personal reflection, and you got to uncover those things. And once you uncover who you are, what you are, where you are, and what you want out of life, then we looked at this where you've got to take responsibility and own it. And we touched just a second on this man in John chapter 5. You can turn there for just a second if you wish, but we're not going to stay there long. But in John chapter 5, the man who'd been lame for 38 years, and Jesus comes to him and says, do you wish to get well? And the man says, of course I want to get well. But every time I try to get well, somebody beats me in the water. Somebody beats me into the pool where I can receive the healing. Every time I seek to do better, it's always somebody else's fault for the reason I can't be there. And we looked at what it meant to take responsibility. Once we uncover who we are, what we are, where we are, and what we want out of life, we gotta learn to own that and take responsibility for that. We can't be blaming everybody for all of our problems. We can't be saying, Jesus was making a point, and I think the only healing that he would receive was becoming from Jesus to begin with, and Jesus gives him that healing when he says to him, do you wish to get well? Arise, take up your bed and walk. And he jumps up from his bed and walks. We have to begin to seize that moment. God says, I'll give you abundant living. And we look at it, why don't we have an abundant living? Well, if I had a boss that understood a little more. Well, if I did this. Well, if my spouse did this. Or if my kids were a little better. Or if my life was a little better. Or if the teacher was a little more understanding. Or if the coach would listen to me here. No, that's not abundant living. That never wins. Because that is the next step in what we do, and that is where we play the victim. We play the victim. You will never have an abundant life if you constantly are playing the victim with things. If you've developed this victim mentality that, poor, pitiful me. I can't do this. I could do this if others were better to me. I could have this abundant life if this happened. And over, if we say that, if we develop a mentality. Now I want you to turn to the reading that we have, or that we had just a few moments ago in Romans chapter 8. I want you to look at this, and I think I may be jumping here the gun a little bit. I want to get this. Yeah, I want you to look at this verse here in Romans chapter 8. Again, verse 31. What shall we say to these things? If God's for us, who can be against us? Well, that's pretty obvious. We look at all throughout the Old Testament. We look at the stories of Gideon. We looked at the stories of Moses and the children of Israel against the Pharaoh and the Egyptians. We look against all these battles that they had. And we read all that and we know if God's for us, who can beat us if God is with us? We understand that. He did not spare his own son, but he gave him up for us. How will he not also graciously give us all things? So if we know that if he's for us, there's nobody that can beat us, and we know that he graciously gave us his son, what makes us think otherwise he wouldn't graciously give us other things? Giving us Jesus was a free gift, but we have an understanding that just as he gave Jesus, we look throughout the history of the Bible, how he often gave good gifts to his people when they needed it. So if he's for us, who can be against us? We know that he gave us Jesus. We know also he's going to give us other things if we need them. So who's going to bring a charge against God's elect? Who's going to be a charge against us? It is God who justifies. Who is to condemn? Christ Jesus is the one who died. More than that, he was raised. He's at the right hand of God. Indeed, is interceding now for us. So who shall separate us from the love of Christ? And I want us to look at these for just a second. Who is going to be able to separate you from the love that Christ has? Because just as a parent loves the child and wants the best out of the child, I have never met a parent who wishes their child to fail. Have you? Have you ever met a parent who honestly looks at their child, now unless they're wanting them to hit rock bottom so they can come up? I understand that. But I've never really wanted one just to gloat in the failure of their own child. See, God, we are God's children. He doesn't gloat if we fail. He doesn't look for us to fail. He wants us, he has plans for us plans for a future, plans for a hope. I've come that you may have life. You may have more abundantly, a superabundance, an overflowing, one that you cannot even measure. I'm going to give this to you. That's the kind of life I've got for you. But in our minds, sometimes we think that everything else is against us. And we think God is doing this to us. God is causing these pains to happen to us. But that's not what the text says. If God's with us, who can be against us? We know He's with us all the time. We know He's going to give us the good gifts if we need us. But who's going to separate us then? What's going to separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation? Well, as I look out among you today, I know a lot of you have some problems. Spoken to several of you about some problems you had, and I've spoken to you about some of my problems. You know we have some problems, but I don't know that I would classify any of our problems as tribulation. Well, what about distress? Yeah, well, okay, yeah, we can do that. Maybe we do have a little distress in our life. Maybe distress is a problem that we struggle with. Maybe we've got some distress because of certain things that are happening, some financial problems some strains that we might be having on that or on our relationships with others. We may have some of those problems. Persecution? I don't see anybody here that I can tell from looking at you, I may be wrong, that's been really persecuted, at least not to the point of what we read, what these people are being persecuted from. So those things aren't going to separate us from the love of Christ. What about famine? Not a single one of y'all are struggling for famine. I can tell. Just as you can tell from me. What about nakedness? Well, let's thank the good Lord for that. None of us are struggling with nakedness. I mean, there were people there that were struggling with not having food. There were people there that were struggling with having people kill them for what they believed and for their faith. There were people that were suffering this persecution, this distress. And if we were to talk to an early Christian in Rome who is facing the battles that they're facing about our problems, and we were to tell them about our little small issues, about why we're not having a great life, how there are people at church, they drive a lot nicer cars than I do. It's only because of their parents. It's only they could afford them going to college. I couldn't afford to send my parents couldn't afford to send me to college. Or they got a bigger house than I do. I don't fit in with this group because I don't wear the same type clothes. They would look at us and laugh. They would laugh at our problems and say, you think that's bad? My brother was skinned alive for the sake of the cross. I had someone else who was burned at the stake that lived up the road from me. I haven't eaten in 5 days. Our problems, compared to the problems that we're mentioning here, it makes our problems, even though they may be great, don't get me wrong, our problems are great, but are big, but compared to this, shall tribulation, shall persecution, shall distress, famine, nakedness, danger? Any of y'all in danger? What about anybody facing the sword? It is written, for your sake, we are being killed all day long. See, the Christians of those days, it's written. There's a proven fact that we're going to be killed all day long because of what we do. When Jesus spoke to the disciples before He was carried off to be crucified and begin the whole process of redemption to us again, or solidify that, He said to the disciples, there's going to come a time when they kill you, and think they're offering a service to God. See, who's going to separate you from the love of Christ? Shall these things... Now, here's the point. Look at the next phrase. Look at what it says. No. You see that? Now, I looked at other translations, and I believe just about every one of them, I didn't look at all of them, but I believe just about every one of them starts off with something like that. Certainly not. No. That's a firm, solid no. What's going to separate you from the love of Christ? Is it going to be danger? Is it going to be sword? Is it going to be famine? Is it going to be nakedness? Is it going to be persecution? Is it going to be distress? Is it going to be tribulation? Are these things going to separate you from love that God has for you? No. No. But in this, we are more than conquerors. You see that? More than conquerors through Him who loved us. Now, if He tells us that in these problems that are much greater than any of those problems that we might have, and I know some of you struggling with some problems, and they're some big ones, but I don't think yours fit into the same type category as this. And Paul says, in these rough things, we're more than conquerors. You see that more than conqueror, that abundantly over, superabundance, overflowing? You're more than just a conqueror. You see, we at times have developed this defeatist mentality that we are not who we are and what we are and where we want to be. We're not these things because of somebody else, something else, our circumstances, and our situation. It's not my fault, the lame man said. Do I want to get well? I can't walk into this pool. It's not my fault. What did Jesus say? Get up. It's not my fault that I can't walk. Get up. It's not my fault that I don't have these things. Then get up. That's simply all He says. Stop looking at your problems as ways that others have caused you pain and suffering and caused you to struggle. Because God says to us through Paul, He says, because in all of these things, if you can classify this whole list of horrible things, you can take our little things and put them as subcategories underneath here. And it's the principle fits. In these things, we're more than conquerors. We're more than conquerors. There's no way. Now, when we look at some other passages here, as we look at this, the victim mentality that we often play, and let me clarify what that means. The victim mentality is a way of viewing yourself and viewing life that causes you to fail at relationships and life. That's the definition of it. It causes you to fail at your relationships and at your life. You can be a Christian with a victim mentality and never break out or change the patterns of your life. What do they say the definition of insanity is? Doing the same thing over and over and over and over and expecting a different result. That's what some of us do. We need to break out. We need to get up. Who can condemn us? Now, hold this text and go to Exodus for just a minute, and let's look. Because one of the main things that we have when we start to look at this victim mentality is we begin to complain. That's the biggest symptom of a victim mentality is complaining. Now, we know the process of the children of Israel coming across the Red Sea. We know the process of getting there, and we know what they do. And we're just going to hit this to remind us of what it says. But when we look here, they come to the place where they don't have any water. Verse 22. Speaking of water, they don't have any water. They went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days into the wilderness. They found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. Therefore it was named Marah, because it was bitter. The people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we going to drink?" He cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him something. Now we're going to hear. The children of Israel, I think of anybody that played the victim, that played this role of the victim over and over again, it's the children of Israel. They had been slaves for so long, they had developed a slave mindset. We're slaves. We can't do anything. We can't do this. We can't survive. They come out of Egypt, we're still slaves. Even though they've been set free, they still have this slave mentality. They don't have water, what do? They blame Moses. They don't have food, what are they going to do? They're going to blame Moses. They're not happy. What are they going to do? They're going to blame Moses. We see all of they're blaming people for their misfortune every time instead of trying to look and make the best of the situation. They're playing this role of the victim. And God says, you have to break out of that. Let me show you a way. Let me reveal to you how you can break out of this role of a victim mentality. Notice what God did for them there. Look at what it said. What did God do for the children of Israel? What did He give them? What did He give them? When you look at the text, when they didn't have any water, He cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him what does it say? You can tell me. Log. A log. We don't have any water. We're going to die of thirst out here, Moses. What are you going to do about it? And the Lord says, Moses, show him a log. Doesn't that sound strange? Show him a log. Show him a tree. Show him a dead tree. And what are they going to do? What does He do with this tree? Notice what He says to do. He says, you take the log, He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. Now, guys, as we mentioned in our Hebrews study last week, that there are different ways that God speaks to us. Sometimes He speaks point blank. Sometimes He speaks subtly. Sometimes He says, this is what I am, this is what I want. And sometimes He leaves us little hints and clues. This is one of these times He leaves one of these hints or clues. He's trying to show the children of Israel, if you constantly are complaining and in your mindset of a slave and looking at playing the victim and looking at how it's not your fault, let me show you something that's going to show you how to break out of that. Let me give you a tree. Let me give you a tree. And their waters became sweet. We look at Him today, and for us today, we look at it and say, Lord, give me something. We're not sure, we're not having this abundant life. It's not our fault. We're not able to enjoy this life as You've wanted us to have. If You're going to tell us abundant, where is it? I don't see it. I can't have it. I look and I see everybody else has it, but I don't see it. Where is it? And God says, let me show you this tree. Let me show you a tree. Let me show you the tree that my son is on. Let me show you this wooden cross. Let me show you what my son went through for you. And here's the kicker. If He can deal through that, He has revealed a way for you to not deal with this victim mentality anymore. He's showing us a way all the way back centuries before with the nation of Israel by making their water sweet with a tree. He said, I'm going to make your bitter life better. I'm going to make your bitter life better. Look at the cross. Look at my son. Look what He's giving to you. Notice what you have in Him that you didn't have before. Remember what we first talked about? The life without God, the life without Christ. What would it be like? Now you have mercy. Now you have grace. Now you have peace. Now you have hope. Now you have love. And before, you didn't have these things. God could be saying to the children of Israel, look at you were before. You were slaves in Egypt. You were forced labor. I bring you out free. You can do whatever you choose. You don't have to live like that anymore. You're a free man. I'm providing for you everything you need. And they complain and they complain. He says, look at the tree. Look at the tree. The tree will make the bitter sweet. So we look at the tree. And the tree teaches us that we cannot play the victim anymore. Because you've tried to play the victim, and it doesn't work. You will never be able to have an abundant life by playing the victim. Now go over to Luke 15, and we see the story here that we just read as we began our time this morning. Parables are written with that one specific purpose. Yes, I understand. But the parables also give us many lessons in that we read in them. In Luke chapter 15, we know the story of the lost coin, the lost sheep, And now he talks about the lost son. And we've said even recently that the parable is more, and we've had a class on this that we did, a video series in our class this Sunday morning last year, I guess it was, on how the older brother is really the story. It's the story's about the older brother. It's not about the lost brother. It's about how the elder brother, that's the point Jesus is trying to make, is the older brother. Jesus is the true elder brother. Look at how this elder brother reacts. And it's not right how the elder brother reacts. But church, we need to take some lessons from this lost brother. From the one that's lost, the lost son. We need to take some lessons from him, because even though he takes that money and he goes and wastes it on riotous living, he goes and hires the prostitutes, he goes and has the parties, and he goes and does all this thing with his living, wishing his father to be dead. And when all of that happens, and when all of that is over with, what does it say happens? That when he's eating in the filth, when he is in his distress, when he's in his persecution, when he is in that situation, he doesn't say, it's Daddy's fault I got here. If he'd give me more money. He doesn't say, it's not my fault that I want to eat those pods that the pigs are eating, that I'm hungry. When he looks at his situation and he analyzes where he is, it clicks. And he looks around, and the Bible says he comes to himself, and he probably says something like we would say around like this: I am such an idiot. Look at what I had. Look at what I enjoyed. And look at what I did with it. And he rushes home. He gets up. The lame man. Arise, take up your bed, and walk. Arise, get out of your pit, and go. Arise and come and allow me to show you that your bitterness can be made sweet because I gave you a tree, because I gave you the cross. You no longer have to play the victim, because the victim mindset doesn't work. We have to do what the younger son did and seize the opportunity to change. That's the thing. In fact, I had the point when you go back and you look at the point, how it's and I jumped ahead here. Let me see if I can go back. You'll never succeed by playing the victim. I had this worded different earlier in the week. I had it worded embracing positive change. Because that's what we really need. But this is why we don't embrace the change. Because we want to play the victim. It's not my fault I'm this way. It's not my fault I can't have this life. And we always blame other people. Once you know who you are and what you are and where you are and what you want out of life, then you got to take responsibility and own it. And when you take that responsibility and own it, you have to understand you're never going to make it. You're never going to have this abundant life if you play the victim. So, as we look to go into the invitation, before we sing this song, I want you to look at your life and I want you to think back, and I want you to think thoughts like this. Do I really want to have this abundant life? Is my life what it could be? Could things in my life be better? I'm not talking make more money. I'm not talking have a better job. I'm not talking bigger. I'm not talking those things, nicer clothes. No, I'm thinking, could my life be better? My happiness, because those things won't give you happiness. Am I happy? Can I have this happiness? And if you don't have that happiness, if you don't have that abundance, then the Lord asks you the same question He asked the children of Israel, the same question that He asked the lame man, the same question that He asked the lost son. Do you want to be better? Do you want to get better? Then you stand up, and as we sing this invitation song, you take your problems, you grab your bed, your problems, and you come. And you lay it down here at the feet of the cross. And you look to Jesus and allow Him to make the bitter life you have of playing that victim sweet. So whatever your problem is, don't play the victim. Allow Him to show you what it's like to be an heir, to be the son, to live in the throne room of the Messiah, not be a slave anymore, and have an abundant life. If you want to get better, stand up and walk as we sing the invitation song.
Shine, Jesus, shine, fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze, set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow, flood the nations with grace